Let's go! Fitzgerald West commits to LSU. We're going to take a look at his film. We're going to take a look at what's next for this LSU 2022 cycle. And as you see here, Fitzgerald West just finishing this young Newman defender. And they actually won that road playoff game against Arch Manning and Newman. And they went on to win the state championship. A good job, obviously, coming back and helping in that pass pro. And obviously, LCA is not the highest level of competition, but this film is obviously really good. This is him pulling around and just planting a defender right here to the outside. So obviously, the athleticism is there. A short, stockier prospect. Probably not an offensive tackle, more of an offensive guard or a center. And LSU offered him a few weeks ago after the offensive and defensive line camp. And the funny thing about it is Fitzgerald West, you see here on this pass protection, just burying this guy. He is not listed on 247 as an offensive lineman. And, he very well still could end up playing defensive line at LSU. I do think LSU sees him as an offensive lineman, and they recruited him more so as an offensive lineman. Because as many of you know, and this is very important to know, LSU's defensive line depth is pretty freaking miraculous right now. They are deep. They're deeper than deep, honestly. And they're going to be pretty good there for quite some time. And there's some other defensive line targets that they're going to be after in 2022, where the exact opposite is true with their offensive line. As we continue here at this Fitzgerald West film study, obviously, this is a way undersized guy that he's dominating in pass pro. Here he is pulling around, good kick out block, just throwing this guy down. So yeah, the athletes are going to be so much bigger and more talented at the next level. And I think that's part of the reason why he is a little underrated, because of the level of competition that he played against. And it is interesting considering Fitzgerald West is a lower rated 3-star prospect. Now, a little bit later, I'm going to share with you a stat regarding 3-star prospects that may or may not shock you. So, obviously, I'm really excited about this. I always get excited when the Louisiana 3-star eventually gets their offer. And you're looking at a photo now of his actual announcement where LaTerrence Welch, Will Campbell, and Walker Howard were also there. Now, of course, Welch is in, and Walker Howard is in Lafayette where this announcement was made. But this is pretty impressive that Will Campbell came down from Monroe to Lafayette just for this announcement. Or he might have been down there for something else. But it shows you that the guys that are already committed in this class, they really want to build this 2022 class to be one of the best ever at LSU. So Fitzgerald West will more than likely end up being a part of this class because, as many of you know, these deals are not final until you actually put pen to paper. Now, the first thing I want to discuss here is, will Fitzgerald West actually play on the offensive side of the ball? And I do think so. I do think there's an understanding there that he will play offensive line because of LSU's depth on the defensive line and the huge need on the offensive line. However, he is not the biggest target for LSU's offensive line. Emory Jones, of course, the 4-star out of Catholic High in Baton Rouge, he said he's going to announce on July 30th. Well, previously, he's already pushed back his date. Once again, I'm all for pushing back your date. Announce whenever you feel comfortable. So it's not out of the question that he pushes it back again. And like we always say with all prospects, at any point in time, they could decommit. And I also think there will be a wave of decommitments once games start and prospects are able to visit campuses when there's actually students on campus, when there's actual games, and they can actually feel the game-like atmosphere. So I can see a scenario where we see more decommitments coming throughout the course of the season. So, yeah, it is very fascinating, but I do think Fitzgerald West will for sure end up being in this class, even though he is a lower-rated offensive lineman, because LSU desperately needs offensive linemen. And this does help out considering LSU did lose Lucas Taylor a few weeks ago to Mississippi State. Was it mutual? I'm not sure, but they did lose him, and they're able to replace that huge position of need. So yeah, overall, this film is pretty good. And I like the fact that he played both ways and he did whatever it took for his team to win. Once again, probably not an offensive tackle, guard, or center type. And you look historically, the Louisiana 3 Stars have oftentimes been the critical pieces of LSU offensive lines. Look at the 2019 team, for example. That's obviously, something to keep an eye out for right there, considering Lloyd Cushenberry and Adrian McGee. And you can go all the way back to the mid-2010s where you had Trey Turner there. So, yeah, Louisiana 3 Stars have always stepped up on the LSU offensive line, and hopefully the same thing happens here. Now, I understand that there are some of you out there that say, well, I would rather get actual offensive linemen and some higher-rated offensive linemen. And guess what? You are right about that. But first off, as we just mentioned, a lot of Louisiana 3 Stars, but whether it's Will Blackwell, whether it's Carnell Stewart, whoever, Dare Rosenthal, they've had a lot of defensive linemen that were initially thought of as defensive linemen flipped to the other side of the football. I believe Lyle Hitt as well. And yeah, it's something that could work here. It would be huge if Fitzgerald West ends up being a 2 or 3 year starter down the road. Now, is he a year one guy, a guy that could start in 2021? Probably not. Not many offensive linemen are that good, but Will Campbell and Emory Jones are, so that's why Emory Jones on July 30th is going to be such a massive commitment. So hopefully LSU gets that done. As one more clip here with Fitzgerald West. Obviously, you guys have been watching while we've been talking, and see how he does here. And you see he's just throwing these guys to the ground. He's just stronger than everybody he's going up against. And he's putting them on the ground pretty often. So even though they're undersized guys, the fact that he's able to flatten so many guys is pretty impressive, especially considering he's also playing defense over the course of the game. LSU, look, national ranked number 4, SEC ranked number 1. This commitment only comes a few days after Demario Tolan, and a few days before that, Nathan Dilbert, the elite kicker. So, yeah, not anyone flashy per se, but LSU is starting to fill out this class, which is obviously really good. And look, is LSU done by any stretch of the imagination? No. Are they going to target some better offensive linemen? Probably so, or at least some higher-ranked offensive linemen. Malik Agbo's the name to keep out for, Julian Armella. But really the big name here is Devon Campbell, who listed LSU in his top 5. Does LSU still have a shot to get him out of Texas? We'll see. We'll see what happens. There hasn't been an out-of-state 5-star offensive lineman to commit to LSU since Maya Tuwema back in 2015. It's really hard to get those type of prospects. And I know, the Kelvin Banks thing hurt a lot of us, and we were hoping for the best. He ends up going to Oregon, but it's also not the end of the world. I also want to share this statistic about Louisiana 3-star prospects. They do hit at a pretty high rate. So there have been 64, give or take 64. I included some, I excluded specialists, and I also excluded players that never even ran out and touched the win bar for LSU. So anyway, of the 64 3-star Louisiana prospects from 2008 to 2019, 31 of them hit. So around 50% of the time, you get a good starter to elite player. And that's obviously really good. So like a good starter would be Donnie Alexander. Now, he wasn't spectacular or Duke Riley, but he went on to the NFL. But he was good. And then, of course, you can sometimes get a spectacular 3-star player. Most notably, Clyde Edwards-Helaire and Justin Jefferson recently, and that list goes on and on. So there is something about being a Louisiana 3-star that does, I don't know if it's the chip on your shoulder. I don't know if it's proving the coaching staff that they were right in getting you that offer. Because sometimes we think of recruits just as recruits, not as teenagers with hopes and dreams. Because as a lot of you can attest, you grew up in Louisiana, or whether or not you grew up in Louisiana, you grew up wanting to play for LSU, or you grew up a big LSU fan. Pretty much every recruit is like that in the state of Louisiana. They grew up huge LSU fans. And if they didn't grow up huge LSU fans, everyone around them were big LSU fans. And the dream would be for everyone in your community to see you become an LSU Tiger. So whenever you're a 3-star, like Fitzgerald West probably months ago, he probably was 50-50 on if he was actually going to get an LSU offer. And he gets the offer, which he actually got about a month ago at the offensive and defensive line camp, and he jumped all over it. And that means he is really hungry to be an LSU Tiger. And there's something to that. And also, I just think Louisiana 3-stars in general are just underrated. It is Power Hour LSU. Boom! I think we are doing spaghetti tonight. Let's